All right, so today had been a day I'd been looking forward to since the last time I saw Jill because for some reason, every time I see her, my heart starts beating out of control. And regardless of how many times I've seen her, I am very emotionally attracted to her to the point where she's aware of how much I like her. But when I first met her, she had just gotten back from vacation yesterday, and I was very curious as to how that went. And when I asked, I started getting a stereotypical NPC response, and then she bit her tongue. So here we go. I didn't mean to tell him the truth. It just slipped out, like I was tired of carrying the weight of my own lie. I always smile, always act like I'm fine, because people don't really want the truth. They want the version of you that keeps things easy. But today, something in me cracked, and I let it all spill. The nightmare vacation, the fake tan peeling, the drunk calls to someone I should have let go, and when he didn't flinch, when he just sat there and listened, I realized that I hadn't talked like this in a long time. So I asked it to write a monologue, and it wrote it from the perspective of Jill, which is kind of strange, but at the same time, the way that I wrote out what we talked about and how the conversation rolled out is the reason why I wrote it like this. Because there were so many different parts of this conversation that were very convoluted. I knew that when she mentioned that her cat had thrown up all over her leg last night, that I was going to be in for a wild ride. The next hour was going to be a lot of fun, and she did not disappoint. Talking point number one, the default smile. Why so many of us lie when asked, "How are you?" The automatic is to say I'm fine or it was great, even when you're falling apart inside. Talk about the pressure to stay upbeat, especially for a woman in the service or beauty industry where your income depends on your emotional labor. I'm willing to bet that she makes at least $300 to $500 in tips per day for the type of work that she does. Because she's overly friendly, she's more than expressive, but that requires that she's wearing that fake smile all day long. Because when I talked to her about how her vacation went, it wasn't the easiest thing for her to talk about. It was a vacation that was more of a nightmare than a vacation. Everything about her vacation went wrong, including losing her ID on the first night that she was there at the beach. Talking point number two, when the mask slips, the rare moments of raw honesty. The moment when someone chooses vulnerability over performance. Exhausting as it is to keep up with a persona, and how freeing yet terrifying it feels to drop the act. So, after she told me that she'd lost her ID, second thing she told me is that they try to go to the beach, which is the whole reason why they had gone to California in the first place, but it was closed. So they couldn't go parasailing like they had wanted to. They couldn't do any of the activities that they were planning on doing. Instead, they had to go right back to the bar and get super loaded in the middle of the day. A fact that they actually had started doing in the middle of the day before at the airport. But as these little raw bits of her spilled out, I don't know how we got on the topic of the. How do I put this? We started talking about the way that she was built. And I asked her about what her favorite body part was. Somehow we got on the topic of eyes and hair. And she told me that she really liked her eyes, but she didn't like the color or the size. She felt like her eyes were too big for her face, which she said caused her to blink deeply um, all the time. And the fact that she was telling me that she felt like she was blinking deeply made me feel like she wouldn't tell someone normal this. In fact, after she told me about her eyes, she told me about her least favorite body part, which is her feet. Most women don't want to talk about their feet. And the fact that she has size 6 feet, but they're double wide. And that's another thing a woman will never tell you about is having small feet but are that are extremely wide. So she has square shaped feet. And she told me that's the same thing that happens with her hands. When I asked her what kind of fingernails she liked to have, she told me that any fingernail that she got, she wanted to make certain that it didn't make her fingers look like little sausages. But it was subtle nuances like that that made me feel like she didn't have to pretend that everything was fine with her in her life. Any person looking in at her would see that she's a 10 out of 10 on the external beauty side. But on the inside, she's just as vulnerable and afraid and needing to feel emotionally supportive as any other person you'd meet on the street. So, this is something I thought was odd that ChatGPT wrote as a talking point. Being seen versus being looked at. The difference between being seen for who you are versus just being looked at for how you appear. I think this is what she's dealt with her entire life. On the inside, she's an emotional mess. In fact, she told me this today. The way that you see me at work right now is the only time I feel like I know what I'm doing. The rest of the time, when I'm not at work, I have no idea what's going on in my life. I have no sense of direction, I have no purpose, and I have no idea what I'm going to do tomorrow. So, the beauty and self worth and the emotional toll of constant performance for women, especially, because women are put under the magnifying glass at a much higher rate than men are when it comes to just being beautiful. And so, it's okay to be Big Todd. It's not okay to be Big Betsy. It's a double standard that women have to adhere to all the time, especially when you work in the beauty industry, that you have to be aware of your presence. You're not allowed to come into work and be honest with clients. It's frowned upon. And worst of all, it hurts how much money you're going to make. Because people in this industry are expected to show up to work and be positive. You're supposed to be positive at the cost of your own feelings, your own emotions, and who you see yourself as a person. Today, when we first met, and she just dropped that, like she started to go into her standard NPC speech, but she just didn't feel right about it. And I couldn't tell her, I don't know what's going on inside of your coconut unless you tell me. It's just like with people that I meet in my regular life. I don't tell people about this channel. I don't tell people about what I do on the weekends. My life at work outside of my house, I try to pretend as much as I can. At work, I drop the facade a little bit because everyone else is just as miserable as I am, having to work this many hours for as little money as we make. But for the most part, if your job is to present positive a positive vibe with a beautiful face, then you can't come into work and be honest. You can't talk about the things that are bothering you. You can't mention your cat throwing up on your leg. You can't mention the fact that you still call your ex-boyfriend when you get too drunk. Those aren't things you can talk about in polite conversation. In polite conversation, you're just supposed to talk about the positive things. The fact that you actually went on vacation, the fact that you spent time with your friends, and that you could actually afford to take this many days off and go somewhere without having to be plugged in. For me to take a week off from work and go somewhere and just be able to turn off my phone and not have to talk to anyone would be impossible. By the time I got back from 4 days off, there would be a mushroom cloud over my office, and Gen Z would be standing outside the front door holding matches. I have no trust in his ability to do anything, not even the basics. But that's just the way that Gen Z is. They weren't really designed for responsibility. They're just designed to do the same thing over and over again. That's why when people who are in that generation, when they get angry that they're still working at McDonald's, I ask myself, like, what have you done to improve your overall standing? Are you capable of adapting to a situation? No. Are you capable of managing a situation? No. Are you capable of growing in a situation? No. Are you capable of doing learning on your own, doing your own training and expanding your skill set? No. They went to college. Therefore, they feel entitled to make as much money as a person who's been working in the same field for 20 years. That's just not going to happen. And the fact that they're not willing to do anything other than say, well, the system isn't fair. Well, I can tell you this as a person that's worked within that system for a long time. It's never going to be nice to you. In fact, it's always going to be the opposite. So, my final talking point: real connections happen in quiet moments. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations aren't loud or dramatic, they're still honest and hard to end. I think that was one of the most difficult things that's happened to me in a long time. We got to the end of my appointment and she's like, "You're done." And I'm like, "Well, I don't want to leave. Can we start all over and do this again?" And she laughed and she's like, "No, I have someone waiting for me after you." But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to leave. I wasn't ready to stop talking to her. I wasn't ready for how abruptly it would end. Sometimes when you're with someone that you really, really like, the part where it ends is something that you don't know how to end it. In fact, when I was with Mello on Friday, we spent a couple of hours together, and when it came to her having to leave because I had to get back to work, it ended in a way in which I wasn't sure. Do I hug this person? Do I shake their hand? That's actually something I tried to do. And she's like, "No, you're not shaking my hand." So then I tried to give her a fist bump. And so she gave me a fist bump, and I'm like, "Okay, let's do that again." And instead of letting her fist bump, I put my hand over her fist bump, which is something I saw somewhere and I can't remember where. But it's always awkward because in this perfect scenario, Jill and I would have just, she would have finished her job and then we would have just gotten in the car and we would have just gone home. That to me is the ideal scenario. But this isn't a Disney movie. It's not a rom com. It's not even real life. I mean, our interactions with each other are those of two people who found each other in the least likely of places. So, this is something I hear about from people, especially young people, that are tired of Tinder or Hinge, right? Tinder is for hooking up, Hinge is for a longer term relationship. But somewhere in the middle, there are people who don't want to meet on the internet. They want to meet someone, and maybe you don't fully connect with them on a physical level. I'll tell you this much. The first time that I met Jill and she had those gigantic eyes of hers, I knew that she was my type. She was petite, she was soft spoken, she was eccentric, she was talkative, and the best part of all of that, it was towards me. Sometimes when we meet someone and we don't like them right from the get go, our reaction is to make the conversation and the entire interaction with that person as superficial as humanly possible, which again leads me back to my talking point that I've been making throughout many videos. Our entire society is built on transactional relationships, NPC relationships. Today, Jill and I could have gone through the typical, like she started to do, right? She started telling me about how great her vacation was until she bit her tongue. I wasn't just another person to her. I wasn't just a regular client. I was a person that she felt like she could tell something as terrible as this. Her second night while she was on vacation, someone slipped something into her drink to cause her to knock her out. And her first reaction, as soon as she felt like she was going down, was to run away. And that's something that she told me almost right up front that had happened to her. And from experiences that I know that girls have had with people slipping things into their drinks, it's not doesn't always end like that. In fact, I knew someone that had someone slip something in her drink on Valentine's Day, and it ended badly. And she doesn't like talking about it, but it ended in the way that the person that put the stuff in the drink wanted it to end. Not the way it ended for Jill, where she just immediately booked it back to her hotel room. But okay, I'm going to come to my last talking point really quick. It is rare to feel truly listened to, and how one quiet moment can change the way you see someone or yourself. When we were talking about the shape of her feet, this wasn't a conversation that you're going to have with a person that you've met, that you've talked to for 3 hours in your entire life. When someone starts sharing the parts of their bodies that they don't like, that means that they're comfortable with you knowing about what they don't like. And that's something that transcends normal conversation. Women typically don't share how they don't like the way or the color of their own rear end is. But it's something that I have talked to women about throughout my entire life. Like I knew a girl a few years back, and she assured me she had the ugliest thing between her legs that you could ever imagine. She was ashamed of the way that it looked, and I was just like, every time this conversation came up, you could tell that it was very hard for her to talk about it. No pun intended. But having those moments with people makes them feel so genuine because it shows a certain vulnerability that most of us will not have with the stranger in public. Again, coming back to the very basic conversations that we have with other people. As pros, our conversations never go beyond, well, if you're behind a Taco Bell, they never go past the what's your name and let's get this done, or how are you doing? And then moving on. Or the fake explanation about what you did this weekend and how exciting it was when you both know that none of that stuff happened. These moments are very rare. And I think that they're almost forced upon us when you think about in the workplace, because everyone is concerned about what HR would think if you said something inappropriate. If someone took what you said at face value and they're like, "Oh my god, I have to go to HR and tell them what you said." In fact, someone said that to me today at some point, and I was like, "Really? Is that really what you think? If someone says something you don't like, you're going to go to HR?" Oh, I know who it was. I was talking to the janitor at the gym today, and he told me that he doesn't like the new person that's doing the operations management at the gym because he thinks that he's out to get him. And he said if he tries to fire me, I'm going to go to HR and complain that he had it out for me from the first day that he started working there, because this guy's worked there for over 10 years. This operations manager's worked there for 2 weeks, and already you can tell there's tension building between those two. And that's what happens in the workplace when two people aren't going to get along with one another. It's the reason why it's so hard to start a relationship with another person, why we fear our coworkers, why starting a group chat with people at work doesn't mean that they're not going to rat you out to your boss if you decide to take an unauthorized day off. We live in a world where everyone has an agenda. And when it comes to relationships, we have to walk a fine line, because this conversation and all my conversations with Jill could have gone south very quickly. She could have decided that, you know what, I don't like him right away. And we make that decision sometimes, both as a customer and as the person, as the service industry person, whatever you're doing. I've seen this happen even when I worked at when I worked in retail. There were certain customers that would not go and talk to certain other employees or other customers. They just would avoid them at all cost. And it's just something that happens. We human beings can be very picky about the other human beings that we want to be around, to the extent that we would rather spend all of our time alone and feel lonely and unhappy and depressed because we can't find people that validate our existence. There's a lot of judgment in our society, and it has to do with both physical appearance and overall general likability. And that's nothing you can change. I've met people who have horrible personalities. My current Gen Z worker has an atrocious personality, and that's why no one likes him at work. And that's just the way it's going to stay. As much as these people would want to change in order to be better received by society, they can't. They have to wander through this life, through this entire life, with their toxic personalities, hoping to come into contact with another person that will understand them and accept them the way that they are. Today, I felt accepted, even though we're both a couple of weirdos.